recording and let's take a pause. Now look directly in camera and then look at the XD camera. I want to see what looks better. Why don't we just focus on that?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so whenever you're ready, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kara Temple, and I teach here at McQueen High School in Reno, Nevada. And today I taught a lesson to regular 9th grade English students as part of a Romeo and Juliet unit. We're reintroducing the elements of argument through reading an article about how men used to play the female parts in the theater.
It's very easy there. Okay, so first question. We want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to and build on How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before the lesson and what will come after it?
Let me start over.
Sure. Oh, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
Will you reiterate the question within the answer, if you remember?
Yeah, tell me the question again.
Okay, so how does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge?
Okay.
What was taught before the lesson and what will come after it?
Yeah. Okay. Let me just think. The first half of our year is centered around parts of an argument and how students can build an argument by weighing both sides equally and having good evidence and providing warrants for the evidence, acknowledging the rebuttal, and then wrapping their argument up with a good conclusion. We have been on kind of a hiatus from argument for several weeks. We have our 3-week break and then a poetry unit and a creative writing unit. And so now we're diving back into the argument kind of head first. And so we're reading Romeo and Juliet and try to integrate argument into all parts of the literature. And so they're getting reintroduced to the parts of an argument, which they haven't seen for a couple of months. And then also trying to get their feet in Elizabethan theater and understanding the cultural differences between them and where Shakespeare was coming from as a writer too.
Great. Is the text used in this lesson part of a sequence of text designed to build skills and knowledge? If so, give an example of other texts that form this sequence. So again, is this text used in this lesson part of a sequence of texts designed to build skills and knowledge?
The text that we use is an essay that's in our Holt Elements of Literature book, and it's a nonfiction piece that is an accompaniment to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And so it can be a standalone piece, but I like to use it when they're learning about Shakespearean theater. We don't want to just do all fiction, fiction, fiction. With Common Core, we try to weave in as many nonfiction pieces as we can. Some long, but a lot of the nonfiction we use are short essays like this one.
Talk about the standards targeted in the lesson. What do you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
Will you read that again?
Talk about the standards targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard? You want to look at your notes for a minute?
No, I just need to think about how I want to say it.
Rolling again, and talk about the standards targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
With this lesson, I wasn't focusing on the fictional piece of Romeo and Juliet. I really wanted to help the students understand the cultural differences between their world and then the world that Shakespeare was coming from. And so I did that through tying it to the standard about reading nonfiction. And then as students read nonfiction, they need to see the author's claim. They need to be able to identify primary and secondary sources used. So we talked about what the main point of the article was, and we talked about the sources that the article used, whether it was someone's diary or other sources that the author might have used. And then we talk about the vocabulary in the article, what vocabulary words they need to know to understand it better. And so whenever I teach Common Core, I always try to hit as many of the big pieces as I can: speaking, reading, fiction and nonfiction, and then writing. And so our final part of the lesson was taking what they had discovered from the article and then flipping that into their own argument piece. What is their reaction to the claim in the article? Do they agree or disagree? And so they wrote a letter to the London director of theatrics, arguing whether or not they liked the law, no females allowed on stage. And obviously most of them took that no, they didn't like that law.
Great. Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplifies and why?
I don't know what a core action indicator is.
Okay, so
Sorry.
no, you're fine.
Too technical.
Okay, so we're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your instruction. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
I went into English teaching because I love the literature and I love the story and the plot and the characters and the poetry of Romeo and Juliet. And with Common Core, we get to celebrate all of that, but we must also marry the fiction and the literature to nonfiction and history and the world and the way students interact with that world. And so a couple years ago, I probably would have left this essay out. I might have taught it if I had a little extra time on a Thursday, but now it becomes much more of a cornerstone to the unit. And so that cultural piece, that how is their life similar to the themes that Shakespeare wanted to talk about or to issues that were important in Elizabethan England, the kids have to keep coming back to that, how is their life, the struggles that they're going through, how is that like the struggles that not only the characters of Romeo and Juliet might have been going through, but also the author and important figures in the author's time. So we try to talk about how, not just how funny it is that boys dress up like girls, but what do women look like on film now? And is that okay? Or what do men look like on film now? And is that okay? I think that's really relevant. The Oscars are just around the corner and we'll see, who is awarded what prize for what. So it's still really relevant. I don't know. I kind of feel like I trailed away there.
No, you're doing good.
Okay.
So next question on the shifts. How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
Prior to this, I would have only included the nonfiction piece if I had time, and I certainly would not have included the argument. During the 8-week Romeo and Juliet unit, I might have had the students write one argument essay, like, do you believe in love at first sight? Or who is to blame for the death of the lovers? And so the argument had a piece, but it wasn't the center that everything else revolved around. But now argument is all about Romeo and Juliet. So we'll do little argument pieces all throughout the unit, as well as big ones. Can we do that one again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to, okay.
Let's just start over.
Okay. So how did you teach, is there a lock on that door? No. Let's see. How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
This whole lesson is new because of Common Core. I might have included the article in Romeo and Juliet before, but the nonfiction and certainly the argument writing as a response to the reading would not have been part of the unit. We might have had a process essay at the end of Romeo and Juliet, like, who is to blame for the lovers' deaths? And then we would have called it good. Read fiction, wrote about it. But now we need to weave reading nonfiction, writing argument response to that nonfiction, tying the nonfiction to Shakespeare's play. We have to just weave all of the curriculum much tighter together. Okay.
Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensure that all students have the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did you support all students in working with grade level text? For example, how did you provide scaffolding for students below grade level so they can read grade level text?
Well, we had the room arranged into pods so that students could talk with one another and share at their tables. And so I always tried to either make sure that someone at the table could be in a leadership role, or I would go around and partner kids up, okay, you know what's you understand this very clearly. Why don't you explain it to your partner? So just setting up those little partnerships and groups within the classroom. Within the body of the article, I planted the discussion questions so students not only heard me say it, but they could read it as well. And then I'm constantly circulating around the room. I think a teacher who wants to meet Common Core can't just stand up at the front of the room. I think that he or she needs to always be looking at the students' work and constantly doing those formative assessments and making little shifts in the lesson. There were a couple discussion questions that I ended up stretching out a lot longer, and a couple discussion questions that I cut short because you have to be able to see what your students are bringing to the table. You can't plan everything, and you certainly can't can it. You have to be able to read your students and see where they're heading with the lesson as well.
Continuing on that question,
Mm-hmm.
how did you create opportunities for students who are advanced to engage more deeply with the grade level text?
Can we go back to the other question?
Sure.
Can I add something more?
Go for it.
Okay. And then for the argument piece, even though we have covered argument and written argument, for the first semester, I created a graphic organizer that had the different parts of an argument in different shapes and with sentence starters and sort of sentence frames to help the students. You know, I agree with because, or this is important because, and that really helps reluctant writers, especially in the lower grades. They have the thoughts, but they don't necessarily have a sentence with which to deliver their idea. And so if you give students sentence starters to help them get rolling, then they can generally finish up the sentence pretty well.
How did you create opportunities for students who are advanced to engage more deeply with the grade level text?
That's where circulating is really important. As you're circulating around the room, as I'm circulating around the room, I can hear snippets of their conversation, and if I hear something that is kind of going to that advanced level, I can engage that student in conversation or have that student share with somebody. Common Core is aimed towards the advanced student, I think, and so it caters really nicely reading the fiction and having students relate to it and then writing an argument. For ninth grade, that is advanced, and so the advanced students really take these lessons and run with them naturally as well.
How do you know the students were able to successfully respond to the text-dependent questions and tasks with precision? Did the students acquire the literary skills addressed in the lesson?
Can you read that again?
How do you know the students were able to successfully respond to the text-dependent questions and tasks with precision? Did students acquire the literary skills addressed in the lesson?
One of the skills I wanted my students to learn from this is the difference between a primary and a secondary source. And so the article starts off talking about a diary of a traveler and how he saw women on stage, and he wrote about that in his diary, how shocked he was. And so later in the article, I asked the students, well, what are some other primary sources you think that this writer might have used? And this is where walking around the room really helps, because at each table, the students thought of a different idea. One said, oh, well, they might look at the way the costumes looked different. If a male is wearing a female dress, that's going to be different than a female wearing a female dress. And so one student suggested costumes, another student suggested looking at scripts, another student suggested looking at playbills. And so from the variety of their responses, I could tell that they were beginning to understand what a primary source was and why it's so valuable and how it can be interpreted.
Did the students acquire the literary skills addressed in the lesson, and what did you do for students who did not acquire the literary skills?
Can we go back to the one that came right before, and can I add a little bit more?
Sure. Do you want
Okay.
me to read it again, or you?
I think I've got it.
Okay.
So one of the skills I wanted the students to learn was the difference between primary and secondary source, and then another literary skill was that writing of argument. And they've seen it before, so this was kind of a refresher course for them, and that's why I included that graphic organizer. Even though I think half my students could have written an argument without the graphic organizer, I wanted to make sure that was in place just for those students to say, oh yeah, okay, that's warrant and evidence and rebuttal. I've seen this before, okay. Okay.
Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
I don't know what correction 3 is.
Okay. Great instructors are continuously learning. We want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson and what you would improve upon. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently? You want me to pause this?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking.
Okay. We are good.
One thing that we always need is more time, but we don't always get that. So one thing I might do to help the time go by better is just the way I lay out the nonfiction text and then the discussion questions. I had it alternating, so text, question, text, question. And the way I might do it differently next year is to have the text taking up, the left-hand side of the page and then the questions on the right, kind of as a sidebar, and have the students write in there. It's amazing what little tweaks in what the students see on the page, how big of a difference that can make. So I think that might help the students see the text and respond to it just a little bit, with a little bit more ease and control. One thing I would do again is put the students into small groups, because they really were able to talk things through. And even the more reticent or introverted students, I could see that they were kind of listening and then writing things down, or every now and then they would share, which is good too.
Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions?
I thought that my students would be a lot more surprised at the content of it, but they came in kind of knowing the old law about how men played females. I was expecting it to be a little bit more of a shocker for them, something that they could kind of about, but they were really cool with it, and they were really comfortable talking about the gender issues and gender equality. They were very mature, I thought. I was expecting a little bit more giggles from them, but they handled it really well, and I think that allowed us to take the discussion just a little bit further than we might have had they been more giggly.
Good. You are done.
Is that it?
That's it.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. You're fine. Good job.
If they